These are 20 hidden facts about a film that received 0 Academy Award nominations when it came out, yet rose to become what the American Film Institute ranks as the greatest Western ever made in American cinema history. The Searchers came out in 1956, directed by John Ford with John Wayne in the lead role. For decades, audiences and critics treated it as just another Western, a solid picture but nothing extraordinary. 3 lines of text, that's all the prestigious French film journal Cahiers du Cinéma gave it upon release. The Academy ignored it completely, and moviegoers paid their money, watched the show, and moved on without a second thought. And then something shifted. Over the following decades, directors started calling it their favorite film, while film schools added it to their required viewing lists. The American Film Institute eventually ranked it as the 12th greatest American film ever made, and the single greatest Western of all time. What secrets had been hiding in plain sight all along? And what happened behind the scenes that even dedicated fans of this picture have never discovered? 20 facts about The Searchers reveal why this troubled production became an enduring masterpiece, covering everything from improvised moments to deleted scenes, real-life tragedies to influences stretching from Buddy Holly to Star Wars. Let's get started. Fact 1. The film was born from professional disaster. Most people have no idea that John Ford made this picture because he desperately needed to prove he still controlled his own career. Just before The Searchers, Ford had worked on a film called Mr. Roberts in 1955, and that production turned into an absolute catastrophe. Ford and his lead actor Henry Fonda had been friends for years, but something went terribly wrong on that set, with reports claiming Ford actually punched Fonda during production. The tension proved unbearable for everyone involved. That experience triggered serious health problems for Ford, who started drinking heavily while his confidence crumbled around him. Here stood a man who had won 4 Academy Awards for Best Director, more than any other director in history, and suddenly he found himself questioning whether he still had what it took to make movies. Ford retreated to familiar territory, heading back to Monument Valley, back to the Western genre that built his reputation, back to working with John Wayne. The Searchers represented his attempt at creative redemption, his way of proving to Hollywood and to himself that he could still command a production and deliver a masterpiece. The irony stings when you consider that nobody seemed to notice upon release. Ford poured everything he had into this film, and the industry that had celebrated him for decades responded with a collective shrug. Years would pass before anyone realized what he had actually accomplished. Fact 2. Ford requested something that had never been done before. During pre-production, John Ford made an unusual request to the studio, asking Warner Brothers to send a crew to document the making of The Searchers from start to finish. Today we take behind-the-scenes documentaries for granted, with every major film release accompanied by hours of bonus footage showing how the movie came together. But in 1955, nobody had ever thought to film a making-of documentary for a Hollywood picture. No template existed for it. Ford's request resulted in the first purpose-filmed behind-the-scenes documentary in Hollywood history, produced by Warner Brothers as part of their television series called Warner Bros. Presents, which aired in 1956. The documentary captured everything from the construction of sets to the actual filming techniques Ford used on location. Every single behind-the-scenes feature you've ever watched, every DVD bonus disc, every streaming extra, every YouTube breakdown of how a scene got filmed, all of it traces back to this request that John Ford made for The Searchers. Ford understood that something special was happening on this production, and wanted it preserved. That preservation instinct gave us the blueprint for an entire category of filmmaking documentation that we now consider standard practice. Fact 3. The production numbers tell an interesting story. Let's talk about money for a moment, because the financial story of The Searchers reveals a lot about how the industry perceived the film at the time. $3,750,000. That's what the production budget reached. Significant money in 1955, all of it funded by C.V. Whitney Pictures. Cornelius Vanderbilt Whitney, a millionaire who had decided to get into the movie business, chose The Searchers as his company's first film venture after purchasing the movie rights to Alan LeMay's novel for $60,000. Whitney brought in Ford, brought in Wayne, and gave them the resources to shoot across multiple locations. Filming stretched from June to August of 1955, primarily in Monument Valley, but also in Mexican Hat, Utah, Bronson Canyon in Los Angeles, and even Elk Island National Park in Alberta, Canada, where they captured footage of buffalo. Approximately $4,800,000 in United States and Canadian rentals came back when the film hit theaters. A profit, certainly, but nothing spectacular by 1950 standards, and nowhere near blockbuster territory. The moderate commercial performance probably contributed to the film being overlooked during awards season, with Academy voters seeing a Western that made decent money rather than a masterpiece. That distinction would come later. Fact 4. The most famous shot in Western cinema was improvised. Now we come to what might be the most fascinating story about The Searchers, the story behind that final shot. Anyone who has seen this picture knows exactly what I'm talking about. At the end of the film, Ethan Edwards stands framed in the doorway of the homestead while the rescued Debbie has been brought inside, and the family reunites. Everyone walks through that door except Ethan, who stands there for a moment, turns and walks away as the door closes and the film ends. Film scholars have analyzed that shot endlessly. But here's what most people don't know. John Wayne improvised an element of that moment, cradling his right elbow with his left hand in a gesture that wasn't in the script. Ford never told him to do it. Wayne performed that action on his own, and he did it for a very specific reason. Wayne was paying tribute to Harry Carey Sr., a silent-era Western star who had been one of Wayne's heroes when he grew up in Glendale, California. Harry Carey used to stand exactly that way in his films, holding his elbow while looking out at the horizon, and to Wayne, the pose always seemed lonely and isolated. That's when he decided it would work perfectly for Ethan Edwards in that final moment. The touching part comes next. Harry Carey's widow, Olive Carey, stood behind the camera watching this shot get filmed, and Wayne looked directly at her for what observers described as a couple of beats before turning away. Wayne later told director Peter Bogdanovich about the moment, explaining that he knew a guy who stood like that all the time, that the pose always seemed so lonely to him, and that he thought it would work well in that last shot. That improvised gesture, that split-second tribute to a silent film star most modern audiences have never heard of, became the defining image of The Searchers and one of the most iconic moments in Western film history. If these behind-the-scenes stories are giving you a new appreciation for this classic, hit that subscribe button because we're just getting started, and the facts only get more surprising from here. Fact 5. The Harry Carey connection went even deeper. John Wayne's tribute to Harry Carey Sr. wasn't the only connection to the Carey family in The Searchers, because Ford deliberately cast both Olive Carey and her son Harry Carey Jr. in the film. And here's the detail that makes this even more meaningful. Ford cast them as mother and son in the story, which mirrors exactly what they were in real life. Olive Carey played Mrs. Jorgensen, Harry Carey Jr. played Brad Jorgensen, and their on-screen relationship reflected their actual relationship. Ford knew exactly what he was doing by honoring the legacy of Harry Carey Sr. through surrounding the production with the people who had loved him most. When Wayne stood in that doorway and made that gesture with Olive Carey watching from behind the camera, the tribute became complete. This kind of layered meaning separates great filmmaking from good filmmaking, because Ford wasn't just making a Western, but rather weaving together personal histories, professional relationships, and visual poetry in ways that most audiences would never consciously recognize, but would feel on some deeper level. Fact 6. Walt Disney created one of Hollywood's greatest regrets. John Ford's first choice to play Martin Pauly, the young man who accompanies Ethan Edwards on his search, wasn't Jeffrey Hunter at all, but rather Fess Parker. Anyone watching television in 1955 knew exactly who Fess Parker was, having become a sensation playing Davy Crockett on Walt Disney's television series. The Crockett craze swept the nation that year, coonskin caps sold by the millions, and Parker ranked among the hottest young stars in the entertainment industry. Ford wanted that energy for The Searchers, and reached out to see if Parker could join the cast. Walt Disney refused. Parker's contract belonged to Disney, and he wouldn't loan him out for the production. But here's where it gets worse. Disney never even told Parker about the offer, leaving him completely in the dark about Ford's interest until much later. When Parker eventually learned what had happened, devastation followed, easily his worst career reversal. That's how he described it. Fess Parker went on to have a successful career and played Daniel Boone on television for years, but missing the chance to work with John Ford and John Wayne on what would become the greatest Western ever made haunted him. He knew what he had lost. Robert Wagner also auditioned for the role before Jeffrey Hunter eventually lobbied successfully to join the production on loan from 20th Century Fox. Hunter delivered a fine performance, but one has to wonder what The Searchers might have looked like with Davy Crockett himself riding alongside John Wayne. Fact 7. Two real-life sisters played the same character. Here's a piece of casting trivia that delights film buffs whenever they learn about it. In The Searchers, the character of Debbie Edwards appears at two different ages, first as a young girl at the beginning of the film before she's taken by the Comanche, then as a young woman near the end after years of living with Chief Scar's band. Ford cast two different actresses to play Debbie at these different ages, and what most people don't realize is that these two actresses were real-life sisters. Natalie Wood, already becoming a significant star in Hollywood, played the adult Debbie, while her younger sister Lana Wood played young Debbie in the opening sequences. The elegant casting choice escapes most audiences consciously, but something feels right about it, something that makes the character's journey feel more continuous and authentic. Family resemblance shows up on screen even if you can't quite identify why the younger and older versions of Debbie seem so connected. Despite the film's emotional climax centering entirely on her character, Natalie Wood actually appears for surprisingly little screen time, not showing up until about 3/4 of the way through the picture, with total screen time amounting to approximately 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes carry the entire weight of the story's resolution. Fact 8. A deleted scene revealed Ford's contempt for a legendary figure. Frank S. Nugent wrote The Searchers, a former film critic for the New York Times, who went on to write 11 films for John Ford. Nugent crafted the screenplay from Alan LeMay's novel, making significant changes along the way. One of those changes involved a scene that got filmed but never made it into the final picture. Nugent wrote an extended sequence where Ethan Edwards encounters General George Armstrong Custer, entering a room where Custer boasts to reporters about his military exploits. Ethan listens for a moment, then questions Custer's courage, pointing out that his troops had stormed a camp consisting mostly of women and children. Ford filmed that scene because he wanted it in the picture. John Ford personally despised George Custer, and he wanted to demonstrate that contempt on screen. The scene got cut, probably for pacing reasons or because it distracted from the main narrative. But the fact that it existed at all tells us something important about Ford's intentions with The Searchers. This wasn't a simple adventure story. Ford was interrogating the mythology of the American West, questioning the heroes, forcing audiences to reckon with uncomfortable truths. That deleted Custer scene would have made Ford's perspective explicit. Without it, the critique becomes more subtle, embedded in Ethan Edwards himself, a man whose heroism proves inseparable from his capacity for violence and hatred. Fact 9. Nugent made significant changes from the source material. While we're discussing the screenplay, several other changes Frank Nugent made from Alan LeMay's original novel shaped the film we know today. First, Nugent changed the main character's name from Amos Edwards in the novel to Ethan Edwards in the film. The filmmakers reportedly wanted to avoid any association with the popular radio program Amos and Andy, feeling that connection might undermine the serious tone they aimed for. Second, and more significantly, Nugent changed the ending. In LeMay's novel, Amos Edwards dies during the final attack on the Comanche camp, rather than surviving to walk away from that doorway. Ford and Nugent made the deliberate choice to keep Ethan alive but eternally separated from the family he saved, which in some ways creates a darker ending than death. Third, Nugent compressed the timeline from 7 years in the novel to 5 years in the film, tightening the narrative without losing the sense of obsessive years-long pursuit. Finally, Nugent altered Martin Pauly's background from completely white in the novel to 1/8 Cherokee in the film. This small change added another layer to the story's exploration of race, identity, and belonging, themes that would become central to how later generations understood the film. Fact 10. John Wayne stopped production for an act of kindness. For all the stories about John Ford's difficult behavior on set, and we'll get to some of those, a story about John Wayne reveals something different about his character. During filming, Wayne discovered actress Beulah Archuleta crying in one of the teepees on set. Archuleta played Look, the Comanche woman that Martin Pauly accidentally marries in a comic misunderstanding subplot, and Wayne asked her what was wrong. Archuleta explained that she would miss her son's wedding because the shooting schedule conflicted with the ceremony, meaning she couldn't be there for one of the most important days of her child's life. Wayne didn't hesitate. Production halted for several days, the entire shoot stopped, and Wayne flew Archuleta to California so she could attend her son's wedding. Every day of production shutdown costs thousands of dollars, and the schedule disruption affected dozens of people, but Wayne understood that some things matter more than schedules and budgets. A mother being present for her son's wedding counted among those things. This act of kindness stands in stark contrast to Ford's notorious on-set behavior. Ford selected one person on each production and, as various accounts describe it, tortured them throughout the shoot while frequently insulting Wayne in front of the crew despite their long professional relationship. According to Glenn Frankel's definitive book on the film's production, Ford made Harry Carey Jr. bend over during filming so he could kick him. Ford's cruelty and Wayne's kindness existed simultaneously on the same production, a reminder that The Searchers came from complicated people with complicated relationships. Fact 11. The true story behind The Searchers is even more harrowing. Now let's talk about the real history that inspired this film, because the true story proves in many ways more remarkable than anything Hollywood invented. The Searchers draws from the 1836 Fort Parker massacre in Texas. On May 19th of that year, a war party of Comanche, Kiowa, and Kichai warriors attacked the fort, killed 5 men, and kidnapped several captives, including a 9-year-old girl named Cynthia Ann Parker. Her uncle James Parker became the real-life Ethan Edwards. James Parker didn't organize one rescue expedition. 5 solo trips into Comanche territory between 1837 and 1852. That's how many times he rode alone into hostile land searching for his niece over a span of 15 years. The conditions he endured stretched almost beyond comprehension. During one of these journeys, Parker grew so desperate for food that he strangled a skunk and ate it to survive. He sneaked into Comanche camps under cover of darkness, left messages written in English near waterholes, hoping somehow his niece might find them and know that someone still searched for her. He never found her. James Parker eventually gave up his search, broken by years of fruitless effort. Cynthia Ann Parker was finally located, but not by her uncle, and by the time white society found her, she didn't want to be rescued. Fact 12. Cynthia Ann Parker's fate was tragic in ways the film doesn't show. 24 years with the Comanche had passed by the time white society relocated Cynthia Ann Parker, who had received the Comanche name Naurura, meaning someone found. She had married a war chief named Peta Nocona and given birth to 3 children. One of those children was Quanah Parker, who would go on to become the last free chief of the Comanche people. When Texas Rangers finally rescued Cynthia Ann in 1860, she had reached 34 years old and spent more than 2/3 of her life as a Comanche. She spoke the language, raised children in the culture, and the Anglo world she'd been taken from at age 9 had become completely foreign to her. Cynthia Ann did not want to return to white society. Multiple escape attempts followed as she tried repeatedly to get back to her Comanche family, but she was never allowed to return. Death came around 1870 or 1871, her heart broken after her daughter died from influenza. The rescue that her uncle had spent 15 years pursuing destroyed her life. This tragedy lurks beneath The Searchers. The film asks whether Debbie can return to white society after years with the Comanche, and the real historical answer proved devastating. Cynthia Ann couldn't. The rescue her family had dreamed of became another form of captivity. Fact 13. Alan LeMay's research was exhaustive. The novelist Alan LeMay didn't invent the story of The Searchers from imagination, but rather conducted extensive historical research before writing a single word. 64 documented cases of 19th-century child abductions in Texas. That's how many LeMay investigated. 64 real families who experienced the nightmare of having children taken. 64 sets of parents, uncles, brothers, and sisters who faced the same impossible choices that drive The Searchers' narrative. His research notes also reveal that the Searcher characters, not just Ethan but the broader archetype, drew inspiration from multiple historical figures. One of them was Britton Johnson, an African-American teamster who successfully ransomed his own captured family members and then continued searching for other captives. Johnson's story ended tragically when Kiowa raiders killed him in 1871 while he still conducted his search operations. These weren't fictional adventures for LeMay, but documented histories of real people who lost children, devoted years to searching, sometimes succeeded and sometimes failed, and occasionally died in the attempt. The Searchers carries the weight of that accumulated human suffering. Fact 14. The critical turnaround was unprecedented. When The Searchers came out in 1956, the prestigious French film journal Cahiers du Cinéma gave it only a scant 3-line notice. 3 lines for what would eventually be recognized as one of the greatest films ever made. And then something extraordinary happened. By 1962, just 6 years later, the same publication's critics poll ranked The Searchers #1 among the greatest American sound films ever made. From a 3-line afterthought to the single greatest American sound film in 6 years, that kind of critical reversal almost never happens in cinema history. The reassessment wasn't limited to French critics either, with American recognition building steadily through the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. The American Film Institute first included The Searchers on their 100 Greatest American Films list in 1998, ranking it at number 96, solid but not spectacular. When the AFI updated their list in 2007, The Searchers had climbed to number 12, an 84-position jump that exceeded every other film on the list. The picture went from being considered one of the 100 best to being considered one of the 12 best. The film also topped the AFI's list of the 10 greatest westerns, earning the #1 ranking above all others in the genre. Fact 15. The modern critical consensus is nearly unanimous. Today, The Searchers enjoys what can only be described as universal acclaim from critics and audiences alike. 94 out of 100 on Metacritic, a score the site classifies as universal acclaim. 87% approval on Rotten Tomatoes, with an average score of 9.1 out of 10, 7.8 out of 10 on the Internet Movie Database, from over 102,000 individual votes, a remarkable level of engagement for a nearly 70-year-old Western. The Library of Congress selected The Searchers for preservation in the National Film Registry in 1989, during the very first year of the program, making it one of just 25 films initially deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant enough to warrant permanent preservation. 0 Academy Award nominations upon release, and now the picture stands officially recognized by the United States government as a cultural treasure worthy of preservation for future generations. Fact 16. Buddy Holly wrote his first hit because of this film. Here's a fact that surprises almost everyone who hears it. The Searchers directly inspired one of the most famous rock and roll songs ever recorded. In June of 1956, musician Buddy Holly and his drummer Jerry Allison went to see The Searchers at a movie theater in Lubbock, Texas. Young musicians not yet famous, they simply wanted to enjoy a Western at the local cinema. Throughout the film, John Wayne's character Ethan Edwards uses a distinctive phrase, dismissing things as impossible or unlikely by saying that'll be the day. The line stuck with Holly and Allison, who walked out of that theater with the phrase echoing in their heads. According to Allison, Holly turned to him and suggested they write a song, to which Allison replied that'll be the day. Approximately 30 minutes later, they had written the song. The first recording happened just 1 month later, on July 22, 1956, at Bradley Studios in Nashville. Producer Owen Bradley didn't think much of it, calling it one of the worst songs he'd ever heard. Bradley turned out to be spectacularly wrong. Re-recorded by Buddy Holly and the Crickets in 1957, That'll Be the Day reached #1 on the Billboard charts and became one of the defining songs of early rock and roll. And here's another connection worth knowing. That'll Be the Day became the first song ever recorded by a Liverpool band called the Quarrymen, who would later change their name to the Beatles. The influence didn't stop there. A 1960s British pop group named themselves The Searchers in direct tribute to the film. Fact 17. Martin Scorsese considers it essential viewing. The Searchers has influenced virtually every major American filmmaker of the past 50 years. But no one has been more vocal about their devotion than Martin Scorsese. Scorsese watches The Searchers at least once or twice every year, and has been doing this for decades. This isn't casual viewing, but rather a ritual. A regular return to what he considers one of the 10 greatest films ever made. In 2013, Scorsese wrote about the film for The Hollywood Reporter, and his words deserve quoting at length. Like all great works of art, it's uncomfortable, he wrote, explaining that the core of the movie is deeply painful, and that every time he watches it, having seen it many times since its first run in 1956, it haunts and troubles him. Scorsese also offered an interpretation of the film's ending, describing how in its final moment, The Searchers suddenly becomes a ghost story, with Ethan's sense of purpose fulfilled, and like the man whose eyes he shot out, destined to wander forever between the winds. That phrase about wandering forever between the winds comes from a Comanche death song referenced in the film. Scorsese understood that Ethan Edwards' salvation and his damnation amount to the same thing. Ethan saved Debbie, but he cannot join the family he preserved. He will wander alone forever. Fact 18. Steven Spielberg watches it before every film he directs. Steven Spielberg has his own ritual involving The Searchers. Before directing every single film in his career, Spielberg watches 4 movies that he considers essential preparation, films that remind him what cinema can achieve at its highest level. Those 4 films are Seven Samurai, Lawrence of Arabia, It's a Wonderful Life, and The Searchers. 4 masterpieces, and The Searchers always among them. Spielberg has been particularly specific about how The Searchers influenced one of his most personal films, maintaining that Close Encounters of the Third Kind is his version of The Searchers. The obsessive pursuit, the protagonist driven by forces he doesn't fully understand, the journey toward something that might destroy him or redeem him. Spielberg saw those parallels clearly. While filming Close Encounters of the Third Kind on location, he watched The Searchers twice because he needed Ford's film close at hand, needed to remind himself of what obsession looks like on screen. Director John Milius went even further in his devotion, calling The Searchers the best American movie and declaring Ethan Edwards the one classic character in films. 60 times, that's how many viewings Milius claimed. Both Milius and John Wayne named sons after the character. Wayne's youngest son is named Ethan, and so is John Milius's son. The character has become something more than fictional, transforming into a model, a reference point, a name worthy of passing to the next generation. Fact 19. The film's DNA is everywhere in modern cinema. The Searchers didn't just influence filmmakers in the abstract, because its specific images, compositions, and story structures have been directly quoted in some of the most successful films ever made. Start with Star Wars in 1977. George Lucas spoke explicitly about his debt to John Ford and the burning of the Lars homestead, where Luke Skywalker returns home to find his aunt and uncle killed and their farm destroyed, directly recreates Ford's compositions from The Searchers. A young man finding his family murdered, the smoking ruins, the moment that launches him on his journey, the parallel proves unmistakable. Lucas returned to The Searchers even more directly in Attack of the Clones, where Anakin Skywalker's search for his captive mother essentially operates as a condensed remake of Ford's film. Taxi Driver in 1976 draws from the same well. Screenwriter Paul Schrader acknowledged that he wrote Taxi Driver as a modern take on The Searchers, and both films feature war veterans who are racist, alienated loners obsessed with rescuing a young woman from captors who may not actually be holding her against her will. Schrader later wrote another film called Hardcore with similar themes, again drawing from The Searchers' narrative template. Even Breaking Bad draws from this source. Creator Vince Gilligan stated that the series finale, titled Felina, drew influence from The Searchers. Walter White's arc in that final episode mirrors Ethan Edwards' journey because both men intend to kill someone they've been pursuing but ultimately choose to save them instead. French director Jean-Luc Godard captured the film's moral complexity perfectly when he wrote about hating John Wayne for upholding Goldwater, yet loving him tenderly when abruptly he takes Natalie Wood into his arms in the last reel of The Searchers. That tension between loving what troubles us, between art transcending the limitations of its creators, remains the central question The Searchers continues to pose. Fact 20. The newest restoration took nearly 70 years to achieve. For decades, seeing The Searchers in anything close to its original visual glory proved difficult, with home video versions acceptable but unable to capture the full grandeur of Ford's VistaVision photography. That finally changed in 2024. On December 17, 2024, Warner Archive released the first-ever 4K ultra-high-definition Blu-ray of The Searchers. Warner Archive chose this film to launch their premium format offerings, making it their very first 4K release. The restoration used the original VistaVision camera negative, along with yellow separation protection masters, though the process wasn't simple because deterioration over nearly 7 decades meant the blue channel of the original negative had degraded significantly and required complete replacement. Critics who have seen the restoration have called it one of the finest 4K restorations to date and described it as demo disc quality, meaning it represents the very best that the format can achieve. The restored film premiered at the 15th Annual TCM Film Festival on April 21, 2024. 68 years had passed since the original theatrical release on May 26, 1956. Special features on the release include an archival audio commentary by director Peter Bogdanovich, vintage 1956 newsreel footage from the world premiere, and most significantly, the original behind-the-scenes segments from that Warner Bros. Presents television series. That groundbreaking first making-of documentary that John Ford requested now sits preserved alongside the film itself. After nearly 7 decades, audiences can finally see The Searchers the way Ford intended, in stunning clarity with Monument Valley's red rocks and endless skies filling the screen the way they filled theater screens in 1956. So there you have it, 20 facts about The Searchers that reveal the hidden depths of a film overlooked in its time and grown in stature with each passing decade. We've traced the story from John Ford's professional crisis to his request for the first making-of documentary in Hollywood history. John Wayne improvised a silent tribute to his childhood hero in the most famous shot in Western cinema. Walt Disney's refusal created one of Hollywood's greatest career regrets. Two sisters played the same character, and a deleted scene would have shown Ford's contempt for George Custer. We discovered the real tragedy of Cynthia Ann Parker, a woman whose rescue became another form of imprisonment, and the obsessive uncle who ate a skunk to survive his solo expeditions into Comanche territory. We witnessed the most dramatic critical reversal in film history, from a 3-line notice to the greatest American Western ever made. And we followed the film's influence forward through time, from Buddy Holly's 30-minute songwriting session to Martin Scorsese's annual viewing ritual, from the burning homestead in Star Wars to the final episode of Breaking Bad. $3,750,000 to make and a moderate profit upon release. 0 Academy Award nominations. And yet here we are, nearly 7 decades later, still talking about it, still analyzing it, still arguing about what it means. Roger Ebert once observed that Ford was trying, imperfectly, even nervously, to depict racism that justified genocide, and many 1956 audiences probably missed that critique because they simply accepted the story at face value. But the critique lived there, embedded in the character of Ethan Edwards, a man whose heroism proves inseparable from his hatred, whose love for his family drives him to actions that border on madness. The film ends with that famous doorway shot. Everyone else walks into the house while Ethan stands alone in the frame, holds his elbow in that pose borrowed from Harry Carey Sr., and turns away. The door closes. As Scorsese wrote, in that final moment, The Searchers becomes a ghost story. Ethan has traveled too far, seen too much, done too much. He saved Debbie, lifted her up instead of killing her, but he cannot share in the happiness he preserved. He will wander forever between the winds. That's the genius of The Searchers. A Western about a hero who is also a monster. A rescue story that asks whether rescue is even possible. A beautiful film about ugly impulses made by complicated people in a complicated time. And after 70 years, it still haunts and troubles us. That's what great art does. Thank you for watching. If you love classic westerns and want more deep dives into the films that shaped the genre, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next video. Drop a comment below and let us know your favorite scene from The Searchers, what hidden facts you already knew, and which ones surprised you. We read every comment and love hearing from fellow film enthusiasts. Until next time.